it's Susan here from Komori no Hime Cosplay, and today we're going to be making the apron for the Black Cat Cardcaptor Sakura costume. To make Sakura's apron, we're going to be using the Cutsew pattern number 45. This is the Galomp XD pattern, the same pattern that we used for the base dress. And this time we're going to be using the apron pattern, though we are going to be doing a couple modifications to make it look a little bit more like Sakura. And for the fabric, I'm using a pink glitter cotton that I got from Joann's. You can use pretty much whatever shade of pink you like. In the manga artwork, it's a very light pink, whereas in the anime, it's more of a hot pink, and you can use whatever shade of pink you prefer. Now we're going to take the apron top center and the apron top side pieces and sew them together along the side seams. And we're going to repeat this with a second set of apron front pieces that'll become the lining. Then the instructions say to put right sides together, and we're going to sew them together along the sides and along the collar, leaving the bottom edge and the shoulders open. Turn the apron bodice piece right side out and top stitch along the edges. I also zigzagged along the shoulder straps to help keep them from fraying. Cut 4 of the strap pieces out of the pink fabric, and if you so desire, you can put some interfacing on them. Then we're going to put right sides together, and we're going to sew them together along the top and along the bottom to create a tube. Turn the strap pieces right side out and press them flat. I also top stitched along the long sides and zigzagged the edges on the shorter sides. Putting right sides together, sew the strap to the shoulder piece of the apron. The instructions call for adding the ruffles at this point, however I'm going to switch things up and add the ruffles last because I have some concerns about the fit of this apron. So we're going to move on to the skirt part of the apron, and we have the skirt front piece, and then there are 2 skirt back pieces. We're going to sew them together along the side seams and also hem along the bottom and along the sides using a rolled hem. Take the apron facing pieces and we're going to apply some fusible interfacing onto each of them, and I also went ahead and zigzagged along all the edges. Now we're going to put them so that the right sides are together, and we're going to sew them together along one of the sides. Putting right sides together, sandwich the apron top in between the apron skirt and the apron facing, and sew them all together along the waistband. So I've taken the apron and turned it right side out and top stitched all along the waistband to keep everything in place. And now this is when we're starting to run into a whole bunch of fitting issues. I'm honestly really disappointed with this pattern because I love the pattern for the dress, but I'm gonna have to make some alterations to the pattern in order to get it to fit for the apron part, because I cut a size large for the dress, and that's what I made, and a size large for the apron as well, and even I did increase the seam allowance I used a larger seam allowance than was suggested for the bodice of this apron, and there's still so much room in it. It does not fit like the dress does. There's so much space in here, and with the way the straps crisscross in the back, there's also a lot of gapping at the shoulders. There's all this extra space, not to mention that the seam for the shoulders is way farther back than the seam for the dress underneath, which I feel like this is a good placement on the dress, and this is really pulled back. Not to mention that the waist of the apron is quite small. They're relying on the crisscross of the apron and the bow to hold it in place, as the bow is supposed to have a snap on either side to snap onto the apron, but there's just such a large difference in between the bust measurement and the waist measurement that it looks okay when it's on the dress form like this, but when I tried it on in person, it's very tight at the waist, and there's just so much material at the bust that it just looks awkward. So right now it's crisscrossed and just pinned into place down here. So I'm going to try taking out the pins and having it go straight back instead of being crisscrossed, and we'll see what that looks like. Here's what it looks like with the straps straight instead of crisscrossed in the back, and this does help. It's not a perfect solution, but I think it does look better now. There's not as much gapping at the top of the shoulders, and because we have the extra length of the strap because they're no longer crisscrossed, it means that I can have the waistband of the apron sit a bit lower, which is a little bit more flattering. There still is a lot of room in the front of the bodice, and especially when I try it on, there's a lot of gapping on the sides here, but there's not really much I can do about that at this point. One thing, since it no longer has the crisscross in the back, that means that one of the anchor points for keeping the apron on is no longer there, so the straps do tend to slide around. So since the bow is pretty much what's going to be the only thing holding this apron closed at this point, I'm going to have to add multiple snaps so that I have multiple places for the bow to attach and hopefully keep everything together. Now that that's out of the way, we're going to move on to the bow. So we're going to cut 4 of the bow pieces out of pink fabric, and we're going to leave 2 of them plain, and 2 of them we're going to apply some fusible interfacing to them. Then we're going to put right sides together and sew them together along the curved sides, leaving the flatter sides open so it can be turned right side out. Then, once it has been sewn, we're going to turn it right side out. It needs a little bit of ironing, and we're going to top stitch along the curved sides, and on the flatter sides, sew a zigzag stitch to keep them together. Put the 2 bow pieces together, and we're going to sew them together along the short ends. To make the knot of the bow, I'm not sure what happened to the knot pattern, but I cannot find it anywhere. So I just made my own rectangle out of the pink fabric, and now we're going to fold it in half and sew it together along the long side. Turn the knot right side out and zigzag along the raw edges to keep them from fraying. Then we're going to fold them inward and sew them in place so that we have the base knot. Wrap the knot piece around the center of the bow and hand sew it into place. To attach the bow to the apron, we're then going to sew 2 snaps onto each side of the apron and the corresponding snaps onto the underside of the bow. I decided not to use the bow tail pattern that was included in the pattern because it wasn't quite Sakura's design. Instead, I cut 2 long curved pieces out of the pink fabric and hemmed along the edges. Then I sewed the bow tails to the underside of the bow and also sewed on some smaller bells to the bottoms of the tails. For the ruffles on Sakura's apron, I decided to not use the pattern that was included with the apron pattern because the ruffles were a little bit on the smaller side in comparison to Sakura's giant 90s ruffles. I probably could have even gone a bit larger than this, but I cut it out of the pink fabric and then on the curved side, hemmed it. On the straight side, finished it using a zigzag stitch and also sewed a line of stitching along it that'll be used to gather it later on. Gather the ruffles and sew them onto the apron. And lastly, to finish up the tail, we're going to cut a piece of black fleece on the fold, curved on one end, and we're going to sew around the curved end all the way down, leaving the other end open so it can be turned right side out. Turn the tube right side out and stuff it full of polyfill. Sew the tail to the underside of the bow, and with that, Sakura's apron is done. For more cosplay tutorial videos, please subscribe, and thank you very much for watching!